Hello everyone, welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a doctoral student in psychology, and with me is Mr. Norman Gayford, a professor of English and philosophy. Many of the themes we address in this show revolve around a few basic things. What the internal experience of a person is, what the external reality of the universe is, and how we attempt to bridge our understanding of the two through language. Today's topic will push me and Norm to our limits in each category. While there are no easy topics in philosophy, trying to conceptualize what awareness means for humanity and life as a whole is a profoundly difficult task.
Yeah, let's push our limits.
So, I have like 4 questions for this episode, and I don't even know if we'll get through them all. Some of them are pretty deep.
All right.
So, we'll start out with what is awareness?
Yeah. All right. We're both going to tackle this definition. So etymologically, to be aware is rather passively to have knowledge, to have perception. I wanted to contrast that with beware,
right?
Which is more actively expecting trouble or expecting intrusion or whatever it happens to be. So to be concerned, to be aware, the old version of it, just where. Being where is being open to knowledge. To be aware is to have knowledge. To beware is not just about danger, but as I read it etymologically, it became that danger-oriented thing, but it seems to me that there's possibilities to look at it as being actively looking for knowledge.
Interesting. Okay, so here's where the hard work begins. And awareness as a concept in language is pretty malleable. People use it in a variety of contexts. So the definition we come to may not be right, but we're going to try to come to some kind of definition in order to have a coherent conversation about it. So yep. I think where we need to start with that is contrasting how is awareness different from consciousness or perception?
There's an integrative function to me. I want to hear what you think about this too. There's an integrative function in consciousness. So there's an awareness, but there's an awareness that is built upon, whether one wants to say tethers or bridges or overlapping constructs, integrated and working together. So it's not just a single experience that is in no context. It's knowledge arising out of overlapping contexts and structures.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of thinking along the same lines. I think perception is sensory. So you can define perception with your 5 senses. You can see something, or you can smell it, or touch it, whatever you do.
Yeah.
Awareness and consciousness are a little bit more complicated. But I think that, awareness, I think, depending on how you're looking at them, you could define consciousness as being a physical attribute and awareness as a cognitive attribute.
Yeah.
So, is somebody awake or are they sleeping? Well, that would determine whether or not they're conscious. It would also determine whether or not they're aware. But somebody can be conscious and not aware, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give an example. And someday when I'm long gone, if my granddaughter hears this, I hope she'll chuckle. Was playing hide and seek recently the whole family, because there was a lot of enjoyment of that going on with her. And I was hiding behind a door, and my second born was leading their niece around, and there I was behind the door. The 2-year-old came up, looked out the window, which is right next to the door, and then looked away another direction, and then looked and saw my knee, and then my daughter said, "Where's Grandpa?" "Not here. No, not here. Where Grandpa?" Gone. And that was so funny. Max started laughing, and then we came. The whole cycle happened again, and still didn't see me. And this is an aware little person in many ways, so popping alive. And the third time, followed the leg up and saw me. So was conscious, certainly, was very actively conscious, was aware of some things like what was going outside the window and what was going on in the next room, and yet not of something that's right there. And I think we can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and your granddaughter's at the point in her life where in psychology she's experiencing that sort of perceptual shift to object permanence, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have something and you put it behind a door, it sort of ceases to exist. Mm-hmm. Or if you partially cover something, her brain can't quite integrate it into a whole thing. So a disembodied knee does not correlate with grandpa, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a really good example. And I think that it brings up a little bit more complexity to these descriptions that we're trying to define, because I think that what we are going to have to do is delineate being conscious from consciousness, mm-hmm. in a way. Mm-hmm. So if we go back and say perception is sensory and that being conscious is physical and being aware is cognitive, then I think consciousness is sort of the integration of being conscious and being aware.
Yes, I think so.
So that seems a little convoluted, but I'm not sure if there's a more efficacious way of doing it. I don't think that being conscious and consciousness are the same.
No,
synonymous.
They're not synonymous. No, they're related.
Right.
They're not synonymous.
Okay. So hopefully listeners can sort of follow that line of reasoning, because I think as we start exploring some of these deeper questions about it, it's going to become important.
Because awareness is also, beware, also, this is what gave me my chance to do my own interpretation to some extent. Beware it involves to perceive. Sometimes we don't perceive what is very much right there in front of us.
Right.
And not just for little ones.
Yeah, yeah. So what sort of governs awareness then, if we're looking at it? So we have perception, we have the ability to perceive things, and we are conscious, we're not sleeping. And our consciousness is going to integrate all of this information. So what determines whether or not we're aware of something?
Speed of pace of a particular moment. Now we're getting into the time-space thing, wherein one is perhaps so focused on some things, one entirely misses something that ought not to be. Look, I'm a stumbling ordinary guy. I was getting ready to go outside to take a walk, and I was so eager to get out there that I sat down in the chair that I have in my enclosed porch to put on my boots, and I sat down, sat back, and promptly wanged my head against an open interior window that opens onto that porch. Now, it was there. I'm a reasonably intelligent person. But I was concentrating on the boots. Got to get outside. Didn't think about that thing ready to whack me, or rather that I whacked. It didn't do that itself. And so I think that's these ordinary experiences, I think, are going to help us sort this out.
Yeah, because I think each person sort of has their own struggle, and this kind of is determined by your neural pathways, right? The big joke in my house is my wife makes fun of me because I can't look for anything. Like, I'm a very observant person. Yeah. Like, I'll notice things very quickly, very easily, and especially things that escape other people's attention. Mm-hmm. But if she asks me to actively look for something, I'll never find it. Hey, can you grab the mustard out of the fridge? It'll be the only thing on the shelf. I'll be like, I don't know where it is, you know?
Yes, my life partner calls that refrigerator blindness.
So, you know, what's going on there? That, you know, something that appears to be camouflaged against the surrounding environment can be picked out, but something that's actively being sought can be overlooked. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. I don't know.
Like we're trying too hard.
Yeah, you know, what's going on, I wonder.
Or not scared. Because, yes, obviously you observe a lot. It's part of your work. It's part of your training. So we're not saying people are... we're all goofy, but we're not saying that we lack intelligence when we miss or misperceive or fail to perceive.
And this is a big part of education, right? I think that people... they see people with educational, learning disabilities and that sort of thing, and people get a stigma for them. But really, there's mounting evidence that a lot of the ways people learn aren't at all correlated with how intelligent they are, you know. And I'm one of those people. I always, at work, I'm in charge of the whole plant, and I always like telling new people, hey, listen, there's a bunch of different types of jobs that require a bunch of different types of skills. Some of them are fast-paced but simple. Some of them are slow-paced but complex. And I know that they'll ask, well, how long do I have a trainer for? And I'll say, well, it'll depend on how you do. I say some people, 4 hours on the job, they know exactly what they're doing. Other people, it takes a week and a half. It all depends. I tell them, I'm one of those people. It takes a week and a half, Yeah. I'm a slow learner, but once I have something, I have it, right? And I've talked to you about this before. When I'm reading a textbook for school, right? Sometimes it'll take me, half an hour to get through a page and a half.
Sure.
I'll reread sentences over and over and over again. But I'm grasping the concept, right?
You're piecing it together.
Right.
You are overlapping it. You are going through the process of repeating. But not just repeating, this is learning theory partly, of restating. You stop, you define a word, you look it up. What's that word? Okay, now we've stopped. First you read the whole thing. Some of it lingers. Then you go back and, well, I have a question about this word. I have a question about, well, what does this have to do with this, and so on. So that's the same way I am. It takes it's layering. So whenever I had students who would tell me, I'm reading this over and over, and good. Yeah. That's what reading is.
Right.
Very seldom do we read a thing one time. We got everything that we need, unless it's a command that we're receiving in some kind of hierarchical structure, or it's a phone number that we need vitally to call because there's a hospital event or something. When there's the adrenal assist with keeping something in memory, at least in short term, we can pick short things, small things up that way. Now, yes, people with complete memory ability can pick everything up. But for most of us, it is a process of approach, then approach again, then repeat, recite, rethink, reflect, and build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's different types of intelligence, and people have different skills in different ways. So, it's not to say that somebody can't speed read a textbook chapter and understand it and be able to do it. If they can pick up on contextual clues and they have a familiarity with the topic and that sort of thing. I'm just not that person. But there are people out there that can do it.
There are.
And the same thing with, audio or, experiential or music or any of these different types of things. Everybody has different types of skills. And some people can learn and pick things up in a new way. But in formal learning, some people tend to get a stigma because they don't learn things the way that they, quote, should, That's an issue. But it does come back to awareness and consciousness and all of these things. Let's ask the question, can a person be conscious without being aware, or aware without being conscious? And we covered the first one, right? You can be conscious and unaware of some things. Do you think can you be conscious and lack awareness completely?
I don't think so. I'm not a neural specialist, or a neurologist or anything of the sort, obviously. So, but I don't think so, because awareness implies perceiving. So so there are infinite, I would think, degrees of awareness, or infinite degrees of consciousness. If I awaken, and I hear the furnace running, but I'm just for a moment not sure what day it is, because a lot of days are alike. I might not momentarily be aware of the temporal anchor, and yet I know that there are familiar sounds going on.
Right. So yeah, the human sensory system is constantly being bombarded with more information than we can possibly make use of.
We filter it.
Right. So your awareness is filtering out what you're perceiving to be most important in that moment, and that can change. Right now, it's you and I having a conversation, but if there's some shadow out of the corner of my eye coming at the window, my brain might say, oh, something's about to break through that window and come at me, and then my attention changes, know? And that's outside of my control. So I don't think that falls into the realm of consciousness. I think that this is one of those scenarios where it stops at awareness, right? The signal pathway is saying, we don't need to go all the way to the frontal cortex for this. We're saying, oh, nope, something's happening that we need to divert our attention to.
Right.
So we're back to that flow chart, right? We perceived, we're conscious, and then we were aware, but we didn't get to consciousness. Whereas you and I having a conversation, we go all the way up through the ladder. I'm perceiving the audio waves. I'm awake. I'm aware that we're having a conversation. And then consciously, I'm taking those audio waves and saying, okay, well, what do they mean? And formulating a response.
Yeah.
So coming back to this, can a person be conscious without being aware? I guess that, this really is getting into the realm of biomedical sort of things, right? Anesthesia, right? Well, if we take a look at anesthesia, if you put somebody under, they cease to be conscious. But there's plenty of anesthesia is a hard thing to get right. It's based on your body weight and all these different types of things. So there's cases of people waking up while being anesthetized. Anesthetized. There we go. So, and there's different ways this manifests, right? Some people appear to be unconscious but are aware of what's happening. And other people their eyes will fly open and they will appear to be conscious, but they won't remember any of the things that happened. In that latter case, would you say that person is conscious without being aware, or are they still not conscious even though the eyes may be open, there may be signs of perceptual interaction with the environment?
Yes. I'm thinking of thought experiments that are done that are very familiar, but I'm trying to just tack it to the ordinary. I remember coming out of being anesthetized for a surgery long ago, and the nurse was tapping me on the foot, and I didn't know that at first. I realized that something was moving on my foot, and then there was this voice, and then the voice began to utter morphemes and phonemes and morphemes, and they became words, perceptible words. And she was saying, "Mr. Gayford, are you awake?" And because I guess I'd been under a little bit longer than they wanted, and I said, "I'm cognizant." Well, and I'm thinking about it now because I still remember that my wife thought it was a hoot, but I had my vocabulary. I could answer the question, but even now, decades later, I still remember the process wherein I was having a dream state. I was moving upward through darkness. There were sounds that became, as I say, started to become fragments of words, became sentence. But it was staged.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think everybody has experienced this to some degree. Just quick examples. Everybody's been falling asleep while they're watching a movie, and somebody says, "Hey, are you awake?" And then you say, "Yeah." Well, what just happened then? And then you describe what happened,
Yeah.
Or you're having a dream, and then your mind starts incorporating things that are happening in real life.
Yeah.
Or unfortunately, the one that people may be able to relate to the most is substance abuse. Anybody who has been inebriated in some way has experienced that sort of thing where, your friends tell you, "Oh, you did this thing," right? And you were like, "Well, I don't remember doing that thing."
Mm-hmm.
But there's plenty of other examples, even if you never have been under any influence. One that got to me one time was they said if you put on these earphones as a speech jammer, the government was researching speech jamming, right? They said, well, we can get people, if we play their voices, what they're saying back to them, this certain number of milliseconds delayed, then your mind can't form words. And I said, I've got to try this, right? So I threw on the headphones and I started speaking into the microphone and the speech jammer started going. Sure enough, I couldn't get 2 words out. I was like, all of a sudden I'd lost the ability to speak because the information that was coming in and the information that was going out were conflicting and canceling out.
Interesting.
And it was like, yeah, it was a wild thing, right? So this process that we take for granted of being, having senses, being awake, being able to focus our attention and then being able to make sense of our environment, it's kind of a fragile thing.
It is.
And
it's not static.
Yeah.
It's not fragile in the sense of a glass that's ready to fall down and break. And the break has happened. It's some things are fragile and some aren't. I mean, the thing you just described, was there consciousness?
Yeah.
You were very, very actively aware of what you were doing to yourself in that experiment. So I think there's a through line in much of what we talk about, and I think it's worth dwelling on that for a moment, which is that if one philosophically approaches things, one is doing so with some degree of humility. To say, yeah, I bumped my head because I didn't pay attention that there was this window open. And somebody else could say, well, there's somebody who doesn't know anything. He's book learned, but he doesn't pay attention to the world. Well, that's nonsense.
It happens to everybody.
It happens to everybody. And to say, well, okay, why did that happen? Because I wasn't being uniformly aware of everything. I can't be. I was making choices. It turns out that it had a bit of a bad effect. But that means, okay, so you say to yourself, I'm going to pay attention to what's in that refrigerator next time.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at where I put the salad dressing. I just stuff it in. Well, why don't I pay attention to what I'm doing there?
Right. Yeah, and the individuality of it, right? I remember, so yeah, I'm very good with spatial awareness to the point where one time I tripped on the carpet and I was 19. And my brother, who was playing a video game in the chair next to me, paused the game and looked over at me and he said, "Did you just trip?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've never seen you trip before." Lived together our whole lives. He had never seen me be clumsy. And I rarely ever am. You don't see me fall down or do anything like that. But yeah, but if I try to find something in the refrigerator, it's like, it might as well be under a cloaking device. It's not there. So, what's going on inside the brain that is able to do these different things and struggle with other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no point in being braggadocious about something because everybody's going to have their struggles or have the things that they aren't so good at.
Most certainly.
And it's not going to be, like you said, it's not going to be static across time. I still trip. It still happens.
And you're still human.
Right. So, yeah, this idea of awareness and is very complex. So, talking about again, can a person be conscious without being aware? It's pretty obvious that you almost always are being conscious without being aware of certain things. Mm-hmm. Now, can you be conscious with a total lack of awareness? That's kind of a...
Well, that depends on the... it just occurred to me when you're saying that if we move out of the physical discussion into the socio-political or into the more internal idea-based, sometimes yes. I mean, you can be conscious that you're moving among your fellow citizens in a place that's a construct, that's a political construct, and so on and so forth. And yet, you may not be aware of things that are going on around you, even though you live there every day. I think conversely, you might be aware of things that are going around you, but you don't consciously put together what's really going on.
Right. Yeah, I like the and definitely on a socio-political or socio-cultural level, it's pretty obvious that those things can happen.
Yeah.
And a real obvious example, right? Like, what do I know about the culture of Malaysia, right? I have no awareness. Mm-hmm. I'm conscious
that there is a Malaysia.
That there is a Malaysia and they have culture. I don't know anything about their culture. I have no awareness of it, right?
And you could gain that if you had the motivation or you, whatever, to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, on a physical level, I think that anesthesia example is probably the closest that you get to thinking, okay, well, somebody could be conscious, but yet not be aware of what's going on there around them, or the other way around. They might be unconscious, but then they may wake up and say, I remember hearing somebody say something, or I remember something going on.
Yeah.
Dream states as well are kind of similar, right? You can be dreaming and be actively integrating things that are really happening in the outside world into your dream. Everybody knows, you're having a dream where you're walking down the street and all of a sudden there's a fire siren going off and then you realize, oh, that's my alarm clock,
Yes.
So, yeah, that overlap is pretty wild. And this is a topic of scientific inquiry as well. I sent you an article on the AIC, which is scientists saying that they found the gateway to consciousness, right? And that's kind of where, when you and I were talking during the week, I was saying, well, what do you think that means? If they find this small section of the brain that they're saying is responsible for consciousness, what if you put a needle in there and then anesthetize just that one piece of your brain? What would happen to the human being, right? How would you just fall asleep? What would happen to this theoretical person? Or if you removed that section of their brain, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite books is Julian Jaynes, right? The bicameral mind,
yep.
And his theory of early humans and how this ability to consciously integrate information didn't exist in early humans, but yet all of our other physical and mental faculties did exist. And so what would that look like? And he talks about humans just sort of having no perception of time. There's not being a past or a present, or a past or a future, but just the current moment, and all of these different things and how it would play together. And whether or not you buy into the scientific validity of it as a philosophical thought study. It's very
very interesting.
Very interesting.
Absolutely.
So, with all of what we've talked about so far, would you say self-awareness is what makes us human? I'm setting you up here.
You ask good. I know. Here it comes. I never was good at volleyball. But I'm playing because I love to play with these things. Self-awareness, what makes us human? Self-awareness is part of what makes us human. What we do with that self-awareness, I think, offers a sheath, of a package, a definition of what we make of our humanity. So I think it's a two-parter. How's that for wiggling out?
Yeah. So when I was thinking about this, right, to me, my initial gut reaction was, yeah, that's it, right? If you look at, what the rest of the world, I think that our ability to have metacognition or to self-reflect, that sort of thing is what makes us human. But then I started digging a little deeper and kind of confronting some of that. And to me, the biggest thing would be this, right? Cases of hydranencephaly, which is infants who are born without a cerebral cortex. Essentially, all they have is a brainstem. And most of these infants die within the first year of life, but not always. And in one case, one of these people lived to be 19 years old, right? If we were to say that this sort of self-awareness or self-consciousness is what made us human, then technically those people are not humans. And we can't say that.
Well, no, and we wouldn't go there, and we both reject that. And so then we have to say, so what do we mean by human? So self-awareness can't be the exclusive definition of humanity.
And so this is where it gets very interesting philosophically, right? So now I'm starting into the rabbit hole, right? So I'm digging deeper and deeper and thinking more to myself, well, man, okay, well, what are we looking at? And this is where it gets pretty crazy, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you look at mammals, right, and how their brains work, basically your brainstem generates your emotions, your ability to react to your surroundings, to guide your behavior towards, eating and mating and these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And you can generally refer to that as being self-aware. You're aware that you're hungry. You're aware that you want to go here or there or the other things. So a person with hydranencephaly has these abilities because they have the brainstem, but so does a fox or another thing.
Yeah.
So
it's not just humans.
Right. So now we're looking at, okay, well, how would we define humanity with these two examples, right? Where are we finding this line? And this is the important part of practicing philosophy, but it's where it gets very difficult, because what you realize is that all of our concepts are analog. But the way the human mind works is to try to make them digital, right? You have this one unbroken thing. What you're trying to say is, no, there must be individual parts, and there must be a line where we separate them, right? And you have one concept on one side and another concept on another side. In light of those two examples that I gave, our hydranencephaly and our animal consciousness, where do we find what a human is?
Well,
what a person is, I guess, would be a better way of saying what a person is.
First, I'm going to say this: we are, as a collective set of beings, a species. I think we are heavy-handedly over-focused on trying to define ourselves against other things, because somehow we have to keep convincing ourselves, A, that we're better than the other things around us, or B, that we're better than the other things around us, or C, that the other things around us, we're the end point of those other things. And as I grow older, that annoys me more. Which is not to say that we don't have discussions of being human, because that's every piece of art is about. You released a song this week. It's an element of describing what it's like to be a human in a certain situation, a fictionalized situation. But it explores consciousness, what's going on inside the mind, what's going on outside the mind. But we seem to have this need somehow to say, see, we do this, but nothing else can. And we don't know that. Well, I go back to what we talked about a week or two ago it was 2 weeks ago, I guess, with the whale, the the humpback whales in the Pacific developing a new song every year. Now, you can explore that. It's just as fascinating to me as it was 2 weeks ago. Probably will be for a lifetime. We might say, oh, well, they're closer to humanity. What's with this Anthropocene, this everything has to be defined by us? There's an arrogance in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Humanity is at the pinnacle of the pyramid, and we define things as being closer to us or farther away. And a big one is talking about the environment, right? People say, we're destroying our world. Well, no, until our world is engulfed by the sun, it's not destroyed.
Right.
We're just modifying it.
Yeah, right. We're destroying our capacity to live in this world, but that world is going to go on.
Yeah, the Earth doesn't care if we're here, it has,
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so when we're talking about these things, right, that is what we're doing, is we're trying to say, human is the wrong term. Person is the better term, right? What makes somebody a person? And we have this innate opposition to applying personhood to animals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
there are some philosophers who do apply personhood to animals, but overall, yes.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I guess with what we've talked about so far, what does it take to be a person?
Well, the humanities, which are often shunted away into corners these days, ask those questions all the time without any permanent or absolute answer. To be human is to, as you say, be aware. But being aware can be many things. To be human is to be conscious of one's actions. But there are people who are conscious of their actions, but they lack moral codes of some kind. The things that structures that we label as moral codes, they are amoral, and so they're aware of what they do, but they don't see anything wrong with it. As long as then there are those who say, well, those are animals. Those people are animals. Well, that's easy, but the trouble is, so are we. And this is where we do not pay enough attention to words. Human beings are animals. The human animal. So, okay, so it's not all the other animals, it's the human animal. All right, so what is it that we create things? Is it that we think thoughts sometimes? Or is it just that we have the power of technology that we've created that lets us dominate everything else? I don't have absolute answers to this. I think the ability to create, the ability to think, the ability to experience, the ability to self-reflect are all part of this huge cluster of characteristics that we give to being human. But I don't think that lacking one of those or two or whatever, it's still human. If we define ourselves as, well, we're creatures that have 2 legs and 2 arms. Well, anybody who doesn't have an arm, does that mean they're not human? Of course not. This is where you get into the realm of the ideal. The ideal human doesn't exist. Idealism, back to Plato, is about a realm that we can't access except through our thoughts. There's the ideal tree, there's the ideal human, and so on. And the iterations that we find in the material world are less than that ideal.
Yeah, so that's actually a pretty good segue to the next thing I was going to talk about is, so we just had a brief detour on personhood, and we didn't at all address it or solve it, and it might be a topic for another episode. But coming back to awareness, we'll ask: is all life aware? If something is living, is it aware?
Well, I'm going to a thing that I find really fascinating, called pan-spiritism. It's not the same thing as pan-psychism. Pan-spiritism is often written about now by a very fascinating psychologist from England named Steve Taylor. I've started to read some of his things, but it's not a brand new concept, but it's newer than some. And it's the idea that consciousness, not God, not anything that we formalize as a religion, but consciousness existed before any material thing in the universe, and that consciousness leads to the iteration of material things. Now, I know I'm taking a long way around this. You need to remind me of the question.
Is all life aware?
All right. And pan-spiritism says that all things have elements of consciousness, which does not mean that they are all aware or that they are all able to act on. So a rock may have some vestigial bits of consciousness, but such a small amount that we wouldn't be able to interact. Right? It's a fascinating and extensive set of ideas, but it's essentially, there'll be some people saying, well, yeah, that's God. Okay, I understand why you'd say that, but you need to read more about it, and you'd see that that's not what's really being talked about here. Or somebody else like of our ilk might say, hey, it's the Force. Right. We're back to Star Wars. Well, yes, in the sense of I think what Lucas was thinking that he was trying to do. So all things might have an element or bits and pieces of consciousness, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily aware or fully aware. What would the world be like if we actually treated things as if they had consciousness? Now we're getting back to Aboriginal viewpoints, but also to the pre-Socratics. Anaximander had this notion that he called the apeiron, and the apeiron was this inchoate thing that out of which the world appears and things materially appear. So we're going back to pre-Socratic philosophy in some ways. Pan-spiritualism is a kind of pan-religiosity, but it's not looking for something to pray to make things right or to guide one's life, but rather the human element is in trying to whatever degree one can, to take charge of one's own life, which doesn't mean you're separate from everybody else, but it's just, it's how do you interact with things if you think there might be an element in those things that's just like you? I know I seem to be wandering, but this blows my mind. So we already know, we should do this anyway. We are all, Carl Sagan said it, we are all made of the stuff of stars. We all have the same basic elements. We also know that we have essentially the same material makeup, 99.98 whatever percent, as other species. And yet we are determined to say, no, we're not those things.
Right. Yeah. And so it might sound real like new agey or kind of spooky, right? But this isn't just like armchair philosophy either. Like there's some science that's starting to look at this sort of thing. The living systems view is this idea that cognition is present in all different forms of life.
Yeah.
And really, I think if we're going to answer the question, is all life aware? We're coming back to the beginning of the episode where we were trying to discern between perception and awareness, right? So perception, the ability to, to be a... now language is getting... The ability to perceive what's happening in the outside world is one thing. But I think awareness is kind of the ability to adjust to that perception, right? And what we find is that we think of that as a complex thing. All right, so a tree can perceive sunlight and have but the branches grow in that direction. Right? So is it aware? And we've found that very simple forms of life tend to show some kind of awareness, right? Like fungi. Mm-hmm. They did a study of fungus in the forest, and basically what they found is like, okay, there's a whole fungal network that grows under the forest floor, and it transports nutrients from certain trees. Will send out a signal saying, hey, I'm dying. Here, take my nutrients, and the fungus will take them and transfer them to other plants and do these sort of things.
Yes.
So there's this whole network, and there's a communication, there's perception, there's an awareness of a situation enough to make an adjustment. And that all seems pretty complex. So asking the question, is all life aware? That answer isn't going to be a hard no. It's going to be very hard to say, no, surely a fungus is not aware.
Correct.
No, it may be.
It's a hard no.
And then...
It's not a hard no. It's not. We can't say that for certain.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and this is even more interesting when you have news like you did this week where, well, we might have discovered some fungus living on Mars, right? Mm-hmm. So all of these different things, how they interact is pretty wild.
See, for me, it's why. Why do we want to determine this? I'm fascinated by what drives us to want to know whether other things are not just not you and me just doing this talk, but human beings. Why do we want to know this?
And and the other scientific one I was going to mention is the most recent sort of theory of the universe is that the universe is a self-learning system that is building itself consciously.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So again, we're in the realm of science, and philosophy necessarily. We're at the point where they meet. But I think, why would we ask these questions if life is aware? I think that there's different motivations for it. But I think again, it's anthropocentric, right?
It can be. I think it is partly anthropocentric, yes. But I also think that perhaps at our best, we ask so that we become necessarily forcing ourselves to be more aware of the complexity of things around us, reminding ourselves that we don't know everything there is to know, and therefore maybe we ought to step a little more lightly with thought and care than just to assume that this world is here for us to abuse in any way that we want.
Right.
So I think there is a use to it. I was trying to get us there.
And I think that the two primary motivations would revolve around that, right? I think that there's the people that want to see, that would ask the question in order to sort of place humanity on a different
apex.
At the apex, yeah. And then there's the other people that ask this question to try to determine how we are integrated into the universe as a system, And so again, two wildly different motivations, but they're centered around that idea of all we know is our own experience. All we can we've talked about knowledge, right? And how it's almost impossible to know anything. But the closest thing that we can come to knowing is our own subjective experience.
Yes.
So trying to determine what else that I'm perceiving, what is that thing's experience like, right? And because that's the only way that we can sort of think of.
And scientifically, we are
sense.
getting there from the senses viewpoint. You can go to well-based YouTube videos, science anchored, about how other animals see, what they see. We can replicate that now because we understand the mechanism of the eye.
Yeah. Amanda and I just watched one last week, actually. And they had simulations during it showing, okay, here's how a cat sees, here's how a dog sees, which is what most people think about because those are our pets.
Right.
But then you see things like, how does an insect see? Or the coolest one is, how does a mantis shrimp see? You ever get a chance, look that up. How does a mantis shrimp see? Because you have these compound eyes on the top, but then you have these very high definition eyes in the middle, and the simulations are wild. But again, they asked the guy, it was this whole episode, I can't remember what streaming network it was on, but it was a scientist whose expertise was in eyeballs. And he studied mantis shrimp specifically. And, he said, the difficulty in saying this is how they see is that perceiving is only one part of seeing.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so human eyes are pretty down the middle. You don't have great acuity, but you don't have terrible. You don't have great color, but you don't have terrible. You don't have great, field of view, but it's right down the middle. He said, what we're able to do with that information in our brains is much more complex than what anybody else can do. So he said, yeah, sure. You might have a peregrine falcon and the visual acuity is incredible. Or you might have a mantis shrimp that has 8 different types of color cones and can see colors in ultraviolet and stuff. But what these animals with their smaller brains are able to do with that information might not match up with what we're simulating, because you're taking that information and you're doing something different in your brain than what they're doing in their brains. And that blew my mind, right?
Mm-hmm,
Okay, also, and that's what we've highlighted in this episode is you have perception, but how perception relates to awareness and consciousness is something that we can really only understand in our specific subjective experience. You can't look at me fumble around in the refrigerator and understand why I can't find the mustard, right? You can't do it. Only I can understand, or only I can, be aware of having that specific problem.
Yes.
And it's just an incredible conversation that I'm sure will continue in future episodes. So until next time, keep pondering.